Everyone. Welcome to everyone that's here today, and thank you for joining us. I'm Nora Reedy, and with Lise Bennigan, we will be hosting today's webinar on behalf of the CIC and Landscape Institute. Firstly, we just want to introduce to those that don't already know what the Workstream 8 is and the purpose behind today's session. There we go. So the CIC Climate Change Committee brings together experts, volunteers from around 30 UK membership organisations across the built and natural environment. It's worth mentioning that this group of membership organisations represents a rich variety of disciplines across the built and natural environment. We all signed up in 2021 to contribute to Carbon Zero, the Professional Institute's Climate Action Plan. And I will just introduce you to some of those sectors, so those organizations. Within this, there are 10 ambitious work streams covering a wide range of topics. All are important in their own right and bring together a whole wealth of expertise in the built environment. You can find more about these on the CIC website if you're interested. As a whole, the purpose of the plan is to help practitioners to address the climate and biodiversity emergency by sharing knowledge, promoting innovation, and collaborating across professional boundaries. This work stream, led by the Landscape Institute today, focuses on adaptation and resilience. So today we're going to move into what our work stream 8 is, and today's topic of biodiversity. The group has been working specifically on 3 key themes. So we've done a webinar on water, urban heat, and biodiversity is this third, because each of these play a pivotal role in adapting and building resilience. So this webinar, the third in the series, is focusing on biodiversity, as mentioned. For far too long, we have designed ourselves into a human-centric world where spaces and places are intensely people-focused. This has not only led to steep decline in our natural world, contributing to habitat fragmentation and ecosystem degradation, but also a lack of connection to nature as a whole. This has resulted in biodiversity loss at unprecedented rates, while also restricting access to nature-rich spaces within our immediate environments. Navigating these challenges is complex and calls for collaboration and holistic thinking. So today, with our panel of experts, we will be focusing on these topics and specifically restoring and regenerating biodiversity, addressing impacts of nature connection on public health, and also adapting and building resilient and thriving places. And through this, the wider objective of today's session are to encourage dialogue and collaboration across disciplines, to share knowledge and innovations, and to identify gaps in knowledge, topics requiring further focus. So please join us today with your thoughts and our panel. Your questions are warmly invited. We do have a Q&A section that's meant to be interactive, so you can actually upvote with a thumbs up or thumbs down on questions you would like to be answered immediately. The webinar is being recorded, as you know, and will be shared with resources after this event. So I will now pass on to Lise to introduce our speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, to really explore systems thinking, design strategies requires holistic understanding and knowledge sharing. And our 4 speakers today bring together an extraordinary range of skills and insight. So firstly, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. William Bird. So Dr. William Bird, MBE, is passionate about getting people active. As a family GP in the 1990s, he pioneered the concept of social prescribing by setting up the first health walk scheme, closely followed by the first green gym. In 2010, he set up Intelligent Health, an organization that has a mission to build healthier, active, and more connected communities. Intelligent Health's flagship program, Beat the Street, has had over 1.8 million participants worldwide to date and is backed by research which demonstrates sustained physical activity. Sorry, just one moment, please. And from research, but very few people have the depth of insights to explain this as you do. So over to you, Dr. Bird.
Thank you very much, Lise, and a real pleasure to be here and to meet everyone. It's such a great lineup here, so really looking forward to it. So we've only got 7 minutes, and 7 minutes to cover such a huge topic. I've actually written a textbook on this, and so it's going to be very, very short, but to the point of why and how this is also important. So I'm going to start by just helping us understand how important the environment is. As Professor Michael Marmot said, what good does it do to treat people, send them back to the conditions that made them sick in the first place? And in an aquarium, if your fish are sick, it's very unlikely to be something they've just got from themselves. It's normally because the temperature's wrong, or the nitrates, or the nitrite, or the environment, the bacteria that's too crowded, it's too few, all the environmental conditions. And us humans are not any different. I've been a GP for over 35 years, and the environment makes a huge difference. And let's just get to the nub of what it is about nature that actually helps in a simplistic way. We get stresses all the time. That's what keeps us sort of on our toes all the time, and you get an acute stress response. But if your resilience is low, then that acute stress response, which is entirely normal, goes into chronic stress, or what's called toxic stress. That's where you've got constant hormones coming on, the stress hormones. That is dangerous. That is causing pretty much all ill health, not just the mental health, but the diabetes, the obesity, the Alzheimer's, the arthritis, the cardiovascular disease, the strokes. All of those come from this chronic stress, which causes a complete disruption of the metabolic system. So we want to improve that resilience. And if you add nature, we know that resilience goes up. In other words, people can cope with more stress. And if they can do that, then instead of that acute stress going to chronic stress, it goes to recovery. And that means that you don't go down that pathway to all those diseases. So that's in its essence, the real benefit of how nature works. Now, we know that if we measure the vegetation cover, tree cover, from a satellite, NDVI, or green space, you get considerably less depression and stress. And we're beginning to work out what actually is going on in the brain. So this study, which was done in Berlin, looked at the woodland in that left-hand side and took people on a walk there. Then they took the same people on a walk in the urban environment, and they measured their brains with what's called fMRI scanning. And what they found was that the amygdala, which is the thing that creates the fear, very useful, of course, for survival, but not great all the time to have it when it's constantly producing fear and anxiety. But look at this, after 60 minutes, it's reduced significantly by half. In other words, the blood flow is reduced into that area. In the urban area, it made no difference. So we're seeing now that the changes in the brain can happen really quickly. Just after those 60 minutes. Hippocampus, well, that's the other thing that does the behavior and learning, and it helps to moderate our stress result. That actually goes up after nature. So we've got the two things going up and down, which help us to deal with stress. And there's another part of the blood flow in the brain, which actually deals with negative rumination. That's when you've got these constant negative thoughts. Now, it's a really good environmental factor for our survival, because we want the brain to focus on the difficult things that might be threatening us. But eventually they take over and we're not able to think of other things. And that leads to depression very quickly. So after nature, look at that. The blood flow goes right down in that area of the brain that does the negative rumination. And we can see in the urban area, it stays the same. So these brain changes take place. And you imagine children being brought up in places 24/7, the effect on the brain is huge, and their brains will change completely by the time they're later on in life. So if we look at different aspects, we can start off with the pregnancy, and in the pregnancy you get high pressure and high blood pressure in pregnancy, and that increases 14% for every 300 meters away from green space. Birth weight was healthier within 500 meters. So even from the start, and children who live in rural areas have a larger hippocampus. Look at this, the chromosome here, we've got a telomere. The longer that telomere, the longer you'll live and the less disease you get. And it starts in the womb and it builds up. And by the time you come to an adult or early adult, late teens, they're set pretty much. And you can change them a little bit through your life, but you want as long a telomere as possible to be able to have a long life. Children who spend more time in public green spaces are associated with longer telomeres. So we're starting to see that the impact of nature on the child's brain, not just the brain, but every cellular structure, to help those children grow up to be much more healthy, and when I say more healthy, to live longer. That's how important it is. Sometimes this thing's a little bit, there we go. Can I just go back to there, Lise? I don't know if you can change it. Don't worry if you can't. So we've got the telomeres here. Yeah, so we actually can see here that the diabetes mortality, cardiovascular mortality, all are improved with nature. And there's a whole raft of other things as well that actually makes a difference. Older people who live with nature feel less lonely, so they can have the same isolation, but the perception of loneliness, and we know that's the equivalent of smoking 20 cigarettes a day to your life expectancy if you're lonely compared to not lonely. So it's almost like nature is a surrogate friend of those people. So the gut microbiome, that's also affected by nature. And we can look at, when we look in our game, which we do, looking at areas, we can actually see where that low resilience, that low nature connection, physical inactivity is in the places. In other words, it's not good enough just to build green spaces, but you have to get people there. And finally, here we are in Merton, and you've got a black community here. You've got the park down at the bottom there, but look at who the people who use that park. It's not that black community. So when we actually put green space in places, we have to encourage certain ethnic groups and other groups to be able to use it all. So there we go. That's hopefully a very quick overview of the importance of nature. Just to say, the Treasury invested about £10 million in green social prescribing to get doctors to refer to green space, and they found they got £2.42 back for every pound invested. The Treasury gets some money back, they're happy. So let's hope that builds it up for the future. Thanks very much indeed.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to look at this from a slightly different lens, and some of those statistics have just blown my mind, and I'm definitely going to be using those slides in the future. But yeah, so I'm an ecologist by background. So I'm going to sort of turn the lens on nature in terms of why does it matter and how can we drive that change. So next slide, please, Lise. So what do we mean by nature? And I think we need to, when we think about nature, we need to broaden our thinking beyond just living things. It also includes the natural environmental systems on which all living things depend. So we've got our oceans and freshwater, air and climate, soils and land above ground. If these natural systems are functioning well, they are able to support a rich diversity of life. However, when these natural systems are disrupted, biodiversity tends to decline. So it's important we take a systems-based approach to nature and biodiversity that considers how land, air, and water systems need to function in order to support biodiversity and enable it to recover. And when we talk about nature as well, a good point on that red bold is that we are part of nature. And as we've just seen, it is critical to our health. And yes, and we are dependent on it. Next slide, please, Lise. So yeah, nature is in crisis. There's compelling evidence that this is the case. Biodiversity is being lost at rates unprecedented in human history, and this rate is accelerating, not slowing. 1 million species are currently threatened with extinction, and we are undermining the entire natural infrastructure on which we depend. If we allow all these rates of decline to continue, the consequences for life on Earth will be as catastrophic as climate change. This is a crisis of equal severity and equal emergency. We are causing irreversible harm to our life support systems while exacerbating poverty and inequality. And these slides are being shared, so there's various links and numbers that people can click into. Next slide, please, Lise. So why does nature matter? Aside from the intrinsic value of nature, nature is a cornerstone of our economies and societies. The World Economic Forum estimates that more than half of the world's economic value generation is moderately or highly dependent on nature. It provides us with food and water. It supports livelihoods and human well-being, as we heard, and it regulates our climate and provides resilience to the worst affected by climate change. It is essential that we acknowledge that nature and climate crises are linked. We cannot reverse nature loss or effectively address poverty and inequality if we don't halt climate change and vice versa. And as we've just sort of heard in terms of those benefits, an estimate of 1.2 billion, and I'm sure this number's probably changed since, but an estimate of 1.2 billion every year could be saved in the NHS if everyone in England had access to good quality green spaces. Next slide, please, Lise. So what are we doing about it here in this country? Well, wider, there is a target, a global target, and we have it here nationally in terms of 30% of land being managed for nature by 2030. That's the 30 by 30 that some of you may have heard of. This has sort of been translated in various ways, but the Environment Act in England, which was 2021, mandates the need for development to provide 10% biodiversity net gain, and for each of the 48 counties in England to produce a local nature recovery strategy, which most of which are out for consultation now or very near to. And these are to provide guidance for nature recovery, so it's in the right place through the right measures. The Environment Act and the Environment Act Wales and Planning Policy Wales mandates the use of net benefit for biodiversity, slightly different, not using the metric. This method is using what's called the DECA framework, which is for the diversity, extent, condition, connectivity, and adaptability. And through those aspects, you demonstrate ecosystem resilience. In Wales as well, there's the white paper, which is out for consultation at the moment. And this is looking to set biodiversity targets and governance within Wales, alongside the need for local nature recovery plans, which, as far as I can see, are akin with the local nature recovery strategies that we've got here in England. Next slide, please, Lise. So how do we accelerate? How do people and health connect and fully integrate into these policies and strategies for nature? How do we create a circular economy, financial market between improved health and nature recovery? And we've heard about the numbers that are going around in terms of cost. How do we accelerate while ensuring equitability for people and nature? In my mind, as the last point says here, it's in terms of that collaboration and innovation, working across disciplines and businesses. This is absolutely essential to drive this change, but moreover, accelerate it. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pippa. And sorry, everyone, that I've got a little bit of lag with coming in and on. And as such, I missed the opportunity to introduce Pippa. And I'm just going to take this opportunity to introduce Pippa, who leads the Arab team across Wales and west of England, where she has been instrumental in promoting designs and plans centered around nature recovery and nature-related innovation. She's worked on significant developments and leads designs for large-scale ecosystem restoration and climate resilience projects, as well as evidence-based studies to inform policy and plans. Recently, Pippa has advised on several Welsh government-led studies assessing ecosystem resilience. These studies relate both to statutory duty requirements and to determining specific actions needed to ensure delivery for nature for now and future generations within policy and development context. So thank you so much, Pippa, for that presentation. And now we will be moving over to our next presenter, who is Adib Dada. Adib Dada is an award-winning environmental activist and architect. He holds a BA in architecture from the American University of Beirut, a master's from NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program, and certificates in biomimicry and ecosystem restoration design. Adib is committed to the UN Decade of Action and Rewilding Cities through the Other Forest, a nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration. Trained in the Miyawaki method of afforestation, he has planted over 11 native forests across Lebanon since 2019, transforming 3,700 square meters of degraded land with 10,500 trees and shrubs from 28 native species. So over to you, Adib.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me. It's going to be a fast-paced presentation as well. I will start about talking about our approach, which is the other way, which is all about building habitat for humans and other creatures to thrive. Our firm is a regenerative consultancy and architecture practice working on building interspecies habitat to address the interdependent crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, social inequality, and the crisis of imagination in terms of imagining a future that we can actually share on this planet. And for me, all of this starts with understanding our place within nature, humans as nature, instead of this egotistical pyramid where man is at the top, looking at ourselves as part of the of nature's web. And to do that, as designers, I like to ask this question: how can designers create conditions to support other life forms? So we're usually used to designing from a human-centered perspective, but what if we would design from a life-centered perspective? And so I use biomimicry and biomimicry thinking as a tool to help me do that. Biomimicry is innovation that's inspired by nature. So instead of the Industrial Revolution, where we are extracting from nature, the biomimicry revolution leads us to think of what can we learn from nature and mimic from nature, emulate. So what if our cities were as effective and generous as the forests that they have replaced, providing not only for the humans, but for all the other organisms as well? And I take inspiration from the natural ecosystem at the Beirut River. And I will share this case study with you, which showcases the challenges at the Beirut River. And the Beirut River is a river that is encased in concrete. It is full of sewage. So it's totally disconnected from the community. And since it's disconnected from the community, it became a place of all kinds of abuses, from the dumping of raw sewage to solid waste into it. And all of that ends up in the Mediterranean Sea, making it a local problem with a global impact. So in 2019, with the help of volunteers, we cleaned up a former urban landfill. You can see the river at the top here in concrete with the sewage running through it. And we started with a pilot project of 200 square meters. And we had more than 300 volunteers join us in 2019. And we planted more than 200 saplings of 20 to 25 different native species. So we used a methodology called the Miyawaki method of forest making, which was developed by Japanese botanist Dr. Akira Miyawaki in the 70s for the city of Tokyo. And it relies on first understanding the biome, doing surveys with local botanists, to understand that a forest is not just made up from a selection of trees, but it's also the shrubs, the small trees, the large trees, the canopy trees, and all of these interact in very specific ways. And one of the most important things is the preparation of the soil that we do. So this is the site of our first planting. You can see the plants are really small. They're about 1 to 2 years old, about 10 centimeters high. And 3 years later, we already have a thriving forest ecosystem that becomes self-sufficient. So no more maintenance, no more de-weeding, no more watering after only 2 years' time. And so you can see the rapid transformation from a degraded urban, totally dead urban landscape into a thriving forest ecosystem. And so these are just some of the images of the transformation before and after. You can see again the river on the right side of the screen. And then again, the transformation within just 2 years' time. So these are really very fast ways that we can change and we can improve our cities. So we then started this initiative called The Other Forest as a nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration in cities. As we said, we've planted more than 12 forests, engaged more than 1,600 volunteers, and planted more than 15,000 native trees and shrubs. Sorry, I think I'm now in someone else's.
Yes, thank you, Adib. Yes, that was the end of your presentation. Thank you so much for that. And we are now going to our last presenter. And I'd like to introduce to you Andrew Thornhill, a director at Churchman Thornhill Finch. So Andrew has 25 years experience, practice as a landscape architect, using natural systems as the basis of his design ethos. His work has focused on innovations in water-sensitive urban design, engineering climate change resilience into creative placemaking. His work to enhance the living environment of high-density urban contexts include the New Garden Quarter, Stratford Canning Town's Rathbone Market and Manor Road, and most recently, Silvertown and Millennium Mills Dockside in Newham. In the rural context, he is working on the 122-hectare Welcome Genome campus expansion in Cambridge and Dunsville Garden Village master plan in Surrey. And I believe today is going to be speaking to us about this campus project. So I'll hand over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Lise. And great to hear the other presenters' insights this afternoon for some fascinating slides. So I'm talking, as Lise said, about the Welcome Genome campus, which strikes a chord with what we saw earlier on Dr. William Bird's slide about the importance of our genetics in developing resilience. So the Welcome Genome Campus, established in 1994, builds on the legacy of the Wellcome Sanger Institute, which had played a pivotal role in sequencing 1/3 of the human genome. An outline planning consent was granted in 2021, and the campus is set for major expansion, solidifying its status as a global leader in genomics and biodata. The strategic vision includes 122 hectares of new research translation space and 1,500 homes, a primary school, fitness center, swimming pool, shops and cafes for both the local community and campus residents. It is also located in one of the driest regions of Britain. Cambridge receives an average of 570 mm rainfall annually, half the national average. So the strategic vision was based on an outline consent granted in 2021. The existing land is primarily arable farmland with thin hedgerows and a 20-year-old woodland belt. A former railway cutting, rich in ecological features, diagonally bisects the site. The ambition is to create an expanded science community where people can live, work, learn and play in an exceptional, stimulating and sustainable environment. We collaborated with architects Wilkinson Eyre to rework the outline consent and establish a new master plan and design guide with a framework that places green infrastructure at its core. Spatial planning informed by hydrology and ecological assets led to a resilient landscape network. The minimum biodiversity net gain must be achieved on this site of 10%. However, our client wished to introduce a stretch target of 25% biodiversity net gain. To achieve this, at least 50% of the site will be dedicated to green infrastructure as a rich and generous landscape framework. Water resource management is integrated into the design at both a strategic and detailed level. The expansion land sits atop a chalk aquifer, requiring sustainable drainage to capture and infiltrate 100% of the surface water, protecting and recharging the groundwater beneath. The green infrastructure framework, intertwined with active travel routes, prioritizes cycle and pedestrian movement with an attractive network of open spaces. We tested and developed the design closely with applied ecology to establish a baseline measure of 23% BNG without any contribution from the development parcels, which you can see in white on the diagram on the far right-hand side. So making space for nature is about collaborating across the design team. It's about balancing development requirements with the green-blue network and testing the spatial capacity of landscape typologies to create greater room and better conditions for biodiversity. We are inspired by the underlying chalk geology. Drainage features are designed as winterborne streams offering seasonal inundated grasslands that extend habitat typologies. These features include scrub planting to enhance biodiversity, a feature often misunderstood or not included in sod basin design. Wet woodlands are another typology that we usually deploy on our projects. So reflecting the inundation of riparian zones associated with the River Cam, the green is sculpted to flood safely and progressively during storm events, with water re-infiltrating over the following day. By calculating storm volumes with engineering teams, landscape architects can harness these volumes within carefully designed spaces, maintaining access and amenity whilst reducing the need for below-ground infrastructure. This is designed to accommodate the plus 40% climate change adaptation over a 1 in 100-year event. It also considers exceedance events where the flow path is organized to protect people and the built environment. By combining blue and green infrastructure, we not only enhance the biodiversity, but we improve the microclimate through cooling of the air. So looking at street trees and the network of these active travel loops, we integrated the first cycle priority street network into this scheme, developed adaptive layouts through iterative studies with highways, utilities, and architectural planners, critically to preserve below ground space to sustain the trees through the root zone and infiltration. Combining large canopy and mixed species trees provides shade for pedestrians and cyclists, reduce heat gain on west-facing facades, and adds resilience to pests and disease from climate change. We found one of the biggest challenges is balancing the free draining requirements of suds features with the resistance needed or water retention needed to sustain trees through the drier months. One of the other key opportunities within this project, and very different to the Miyawaki in terms of its approach, was the tree transplantation. All good planning prioritizes retention of trees on a site, and particularly if ancient or veteran trees exist. Avoiding habitat loss is absolutely key to achieving net gain. On this site, we had a 20-year-old woodland belt classified as mixed woodland with moderate condition. Lack of management had led to overcrowding and poor structure. This woodland, initially within the development area, was reconsidered by us as a resource for landscape restoration through extensive transplantation into woodland buffers required for visual mitigation. We selected and moved 920 trees to create a more open woodland belt, interplanted with younger stock outside of the development zone and with new meadows and water attenuating features. Over 2 years, this approach enabled the accelerated creation of new woodland edge with varied and open structure. We believe that the soil translocation benefits from each tree transplant stimulate soil restoration across this area, allowing the mycorrhizal network to spread and reconnect. This is an area where much needed research is required. The productive landscape was our last opportunity within this site area. Over 10% of the site was dedicated to productive landscape. We promoted the use of agroforestry to complete the landscape restoration and achieve a 25% biodiversity net gain target. This is established with rows of fruit and nut trees with wildflower margins, retaining a viable arable farm proposition. The combined yields on established farms demonstrate this approach's value, alongside better soil health and biodiversity. Initial investment in young trees, which can take up to 5 years to yield, can be challenging for farmers. However, offering biodiversity benefits on a site adjacent to development could make this model very attractive. Expert consultation and emerging land management offers potential for community farming as well, with either whole or partial application. The model stimulates health and well-being between the existing village of Hinxton and the emerging campus community. This provides multiple feedback loops, fostering healthier soil, ecology, and community, reshaping development impacts for the better. Our client, Urban and Civic, really understood the importance of early habitat creation on larger sites, and you can see from this image here the new woodland that's being created alongside the existing woodland belt to be developed over. And we very much promoted the idea that the remaining trees were left and integrated into the scheme as it progresses. This allows for minimal habitat loss and increase across the site as one progresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much to all 4 speakers. I hope you've all found that as fascinating as we have here. We're going to move on into a Q&A session. We've got some time allocated for this, and thank you to all that have put in some questions into the chat. So if you do have some burning questions, please put them in there. And we're just going to go through a few of these. So we've got a question here from Tristan that says, planet biology is in crisis, including ours. We have a meta-crisis because it is, in effect, a mitocrisis, a crisis of the cellular mitochondria common to all biology in plants, animals, and humans. So I'm going to hand over to William to address this. It's more of a comment, really. If you've got sort of a response to that, that would be great.
I have got a response, and Tristan, what a wonderful question, because I love mitochondria. You must have known that somehow. So for those of you who don't know what mitochondria are, they are what used to be thought just as the powerhouse of every single cell. So we share the same mitochondria as plants and almost all the animal kingdom, apart from the viruses and other very small areas. But those mitochondria used to be, 1 billion years ago, used to be cells themselves, which were bacteria and swimming around free living. And they connected together with 2 types of cells, came together, and that's how life formed about 1 billion years ago. And we inherit it. It's got its own DNA. It's got its own double membrane. It's basically a bacteria living in us. And we have about 15 quadrillion of them, which is about, if you stacked up lots of pennies, it would be here to the sun, back again. That's how many we've got. And these dictate our life, our immune system. They decide when a cell dies. They literally operate everything, and they have been causing problems because it's the mitochondria that are the things that suffer under stress, both for animals and plants. And that they now think that mitochondria cause all diseases, all psychiatric diseases come from mitochondrial dysfunction. So I'm just emphasizing what you're saying is it is a common factor. We all share the same mitochondria, all of them under stress, and that's what's causing the disease, certainly for humans. And obviously that connection to nature helps reduce that stress and puts the mitochondria back again on an equal footing. But I can't tell you how important they are and how we're finding that they are the cause of pretty much every disease that we know in mankind. So thanks, Tristan, for allowing me to just say that.
Thank you, William. That was a really fascinating response, and I think really just shows the sort of multi-sector, multidisciplinary thinking that that goes into these topics. We've got another question from Anonymous. But the question, I'm going to invite Pippa to answer this one. So the question is, has the focus on mandatory biodiversity net gain in the planning system obscured the need for mandatory environmental net gain? Pippa, are you able to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, mandatory environmental net gain. I'm not sure that is a thing yet. So BNG in England came in as mandatory through the Environment Act, but in terms of a metric that was being developed, and maybe this is what this question comes from. So an environmental gain, net gain metric is being developed. And so there was thinking around that becoming overarching over the BNG or as well as BNG. But to my knowledge, that is not mandatory at the moment. I don't know if that answers the question really, but yeah, I don't think it's mandatory at the moment. I agree if the question is flipped to say, should there be, then yes, I think, to bring in a more holistic thinking around systems, I suppose, ecosystems and their resilience, then yeah, a broader thinking, and I guess that's why Wales have gone down a slightly different route around using this DECA framework with the ecosystem resilience focus. So if you're not aware of that, have a look at that as well.
Thank you. Thanks for that. The next question, there's actually two questions directed towards Andrew. So Andrew, first one is, do you know what percentage of BNG your scheme achieves? So that's the first question. And then the second question is, what was the extent of inputs, so for example, water, needed for the translocated trees at the Welcome Centre? Are these inputs expected to reduce into life of woodland?
Thank you for those questions. Yes, so currently the strategic master plan that we set out is measuring at 23% biodiversity net gain based on the latest metric. Now, as each detailed phase of the project comes forward, we've set up a methodology whereby the individual parcels of land can be then tested against that target, and the target is updated as we go as well. So where we've actually developed detail on the first phase, we've already been able to increase that by a couple of percentage points. So I also mentioned that we're not allowing for the development parcels as well. We thought that was a really important strategy to actually completely bake in the gains on the biodiversity net gain, allowing ultimate flexibility for the development parcels, because quite often you have competing sustainability demands on a project like this. So it might be photovoltaic cells to the top of the roof of a building, which may prevent a green roof, for example. So you can't always guarantee that you're going to get the gains from the parcels. I think the other question related to watering of the tree transplant. So we did install a system that allows for drip irrigation to the trees as the most effective way of deploying that in the months where it was needed. We had very fortunate weather since the transplantation was done. So although the first summer was relatively dry, we had quite a wet summer, or at least the moisture was sort of distributed throughout the season, which was really, really helpful. So far, we've had a really high success rate in terms of the transplantation. We would expect some losses, but the level of water input will diminish, as pointed out in the question, over time. We would expect the support to be no greater than 5 years, and it would be minimizing each year, unless we have a really extreme drought again, like we did in 22.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. We've got a couple more questions that we can address before going. Let me just see. So Tristan's got another question in regards to soils there. It says, with such a stretch BNG target, to what extent are soil health, carbon, etc. metrics a part of the overall biodiversity uplift? I'd imagine, Pippa, you might be well placed to respond to this one. Soil health, part of biodiversity.
Yeah, I mean, I can give a sort of general overview. I think, is it meant to be for Andrew in terms of specifics on that project? But I mean, yes. So in terms of, I go give an overview in terms of those sort of BNG metric, then there are certain condition assessments that have to go into that, which do signpost to soil, not so much carbon, there's separate metrics for carbon. So yeah, I mean, the biodiversity net gain metric is very sort of biodiversity habitat focused, species focused. But I do wonder whether that was relating to that specific project, but it's kind of, yeah.
Great, thank you. And then more questions come in. Thank you. Oh, Andrew, did you want to come in on that question?
Only just to add that so we did carry out a soil resource survey, and we have a restoration plan as well, which is very much focused on retaining the embodied carbon in the soil. So although we need to create earthworks for acoustic bonds and the like, we're always looking to use the subsoil without the same kind of microbial activity to form those, rather than burying topsoil and having it become inactive and actually releasing carbon as well. So it was very much part of our thinking around the carbon story and general soil health on the project. That was, yeah, but it's not measured in terms of biodiversity currently, but it is a critical factor.
Thanks for that. And another question on BNG. So from Graham, so green spaces and biodiversity net gain are obviously very important for all the reasons already outlined, but ecological connectivity of the wider landscape and habitats is key to ensure genuine environmental sustainability. What are your thoughts on how to try to ensure connectivity gets reintroduced into the statutory BNG metric and into planning guidance in general? Pippa, would you like to take that one on?
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of that planning guidance, so Wales, it's there through the DECA framework, which is how they are looking at the net benefits of biodiversity. And then in terms of England, we've got, as I mentioned in the slides, the local nature recovery strategies, which will be brought in as policy. So their role has been to map already important areas, essentially areas that could be important, and obviously part of that is through looking at connectivity. So these will be a sort of guide from developers, policymakers, through to someone just thinking what can they do in their back garden. These should be set addressing all of the types of habitats that county has within it, and it will give outcomes and measures for a variety of end users to be able to dip in and say, right, okay, what should I be doing? Let's look at where I am on the map, and yeah, what habitats have I got, etc., etc. So in answering that, there are sort of policy and tools there. And I can't answer the actual question around whether the connectivity is actually going to go back into the metric. But yeah, there are other tools that we should be all looking towards in the near future to make sure that we are designing and advising where nature should be, that it's in the right place, and it's looking to recover the right things.
Absolutely. And I think there's a nice link there with all the colleagues that have spoken on the call, between a link to social prescribing. So William, I think, it'd be interesting to get your take on this about, the connectivity and how do we sort of integrate that in sort of the health aspect and social prescribing that you've discussed.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lisa. And I think, I do feel this is one of the optimistic things that we should be looking at, because the UK are leading on integrating nature into health. We're well ahead now of the rest of the world through our social prescribing, the only country in the world that actually has a proper green social prescribing program. And as I said, it was funded by Treasury, put £10 million in. They wanted to see what the return on investment, and they got £2.42 for every pound they put in. So it looks like now green social prescribing will become established into wider areas. The pilot sites for about 8 of them around the country. And this will be on additional to the social prescribing, which obviously does things like physical activity and other aspects. So that, I think, is a really optimistic factor. But the other thing is that we're actually, all public health directors of public health have now got nature and biodiversity in their plan for the health of that community. When I first started this in the 90s, that would have been completely unheard of. And it's only since COVID, really, where people started to realize that the outdoors and being near green space was so important that it's really accelerated in health. So we're seeing it from government, we're seeing it from the NHS, and then we've been working with some a main organisation to train up with Natural England, train up all doctors about the health benefits. So the key thing is to get what I was just talking about embedded in doctors and healthcare professionals' mind, and then we'll start to see that it's not we're trying to put the two together, but it's nature for nature's sake, and we've got to look after biodiversity. We've got to make sure that that is looked after, but the value of it will only be when people can start to use it and understand its value to human health. And I think it's putting that. I used to work at Natural England. It was always a fine line between loads of people trampling over fantastic green space and biodiversity, but also if you don't get people embedded and using it and it can see the value, then it would be harder to put that case for biodiversity's sake. So I think we're in a good place. There's loads of work that can be done in hospital grounds. So the estates in hospitals own huge amounts of land, and that is now being looked at to see if can we incorporate nature and biodiversity for the use of patients and staff. And that's the Sustainable Healthcare organisation, and they've got the NHS Forest. So there is work there. I think there's more we can do, and there's more ecologists and other people we need to incorporate into this. But I do think, as far as the world is concerned, we are now on a kind of, for once, in the lead. I don't know how long, but it's a good picture to be in.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just there was another question sort of related to this from an anonymous attendee, which says, given the benefits outlined by William, what do we need to do to increase the involvement of the health sector, NHS, ICBs in the development of LNRSs, green infrastructure, open space strategies? So that's kind of the next step, isn't it? Is like these sort of, big policies that are coming out, best practice documents, etc., to get sort of that aspect integrated into them.
Absolutely. And to sort of going back, I didn't really answer the connectivity. I was more answering that one. But the connectivity, the very first thing we have to say is we are nature. And once we get that established, and that wonderful, moving away from our ego to the eco, which I loved, that's what we have to do. We have to explain and just be humble that the human being is nature, and it's pretty much mitochondria driven for all of us. And then once we get that, then actually that can be embedded into health much more clearly of how we connect together. And it's that connection absolutely that's important.
Thank you. So thanks for all your questions, and the panelists for your generous responses. And I think we are now heading towards the end of our webinar. So I'm just going to hand over to Nora to just close the webinar. And again, thank you for your time. And we hope to see you in our next series as well.
Thank you, Lise. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to the speakers again from my end. So just some practical stuff. We will be sending a copy of the webinar to everyone who registered today. And a note to say I'm going to move to it now if I can, if it's not going to be too difficult. There we go. So at the end of this slide, we have a couple of resource page links. So for anyone who's interested in learning more about the topics today, these will also be included in the slide deck. I am going to try and get back. Please, can you help me going back, please? Thank you. So just a closing statement, really, to conclude today's session. We've learnt that in order to design and manage public spaces and habitats which are adaptable and resilient to climate change, we must understand that biodiversity health is a network of interrelated systems, which we've covered here. So to demonstrate this, Dr. William initiated the discussion with a focus on the science behind the impact of nature on our individual mental and physical health, with an insight into the benefits of access to nature in our public health system, which is vital, while Dr. Pippa helped us understand what nature is and reinforce the idea behind the importance of healthy ecosystem and our shared connection to nature. Application of this knowledge within the built environment was then presented by Adib with his systems thinking approach, which again is a wonderful approach to moving to design, and that was translated through the Miyawaki Forest Initiative in Beirut. And last but not least, we heard from Andrew. So thank you, Andrew, a fellow landscape architect, tying all these three narratives together from the different disciplines through a look at the Welcome Genome Campus project. This project is an excellent demonstration of the interdisciplinary learnings and application of systems thinking to ensure adaptable and resilient ecosystems by implementing biodiversity health at its center. To round up, it will actually require a range of skills, as we've learned, greater collaboration and innovative practices. So the 4 presentations today have looked at a variety of these approaches around nature-based solutions as examples to carry us forward. Please do email us if you have extra questions that haven't been answered or would like anything else. We are available on our Workstream 8 Gmail account. But fundamentally, I am nature, we are nature, and our collective health is dependent on nature collectively. So as always, we end our webinars with a question, and the same one usually, which is, how are we going to collectively take our learnings into thoughtful and holistic action towards resilient and adaptive public spaces, parklands, and settlements? With that, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And thank you again to the speakers for your brilliant insights. Thank you.